Tanzania, once praised as Africa's island of calm, now stands in chaos. The nation that once represented peace and unity is facing its deepest political wound in decades. President Samia Suluhu Hassan, once honored as someone who brings change and a symbol of healing differences, is now accused of betraying everything she promised. Streets are burning, voices are silenced, and hope is fading. How did the woman once called Mama Samia, the nation's peacemaker, become its most feared ruler? Let's find out. When Samia Suluhu Hassan took the oath of office in 2021, the world saw Tanzania's first female president and a promise of renewal. Her quiet strength, her modesty, her promise to change. It all sounded like a new beginning after years of fear under John Magufuli's harsh control. Foreign diplomats cheered her arrival. Human rights groups spoke gently. She spoke of her four-R main idea: healing differences, toughness, rebuilding, and change. For the first time in years, opposition leaders were allowed to hold rallies without being arrested. It seemed the nightmare was ending. But behind those smiles and speeches, a different story was taking shape. Samia began to replace the old guard, generals, ministers, intelligence chiefs, one by one. Her allies called it reform. People close to the top secretly said another word: control. By 2022, top leaders of her own party, the CCM, began becoming invisible from the spotlight. The military, once divided in loyalty, was quietly restructured. Even her inner circle started to fear the new calm in her tone, the kind that comes before a storm. And yet, the public believed. They wanted to believe. But Tanzania's peace, built over 6 decades, was already breaking. The question was no longer if it would break, but when. And that answer came fast when the elections returned. And Tanzania learned that peace was now just another illusion. The year was 2025. Election posters covered Dar es Salaam. Songs of unity played on state radio. Samia's image smiled from every street corner. Mama wa Amani, they called her, Mother of Peace. But the people weren't singing anymore. The youth whispered about their friends missing after night arrests. Journalists vanished mid-report. Political meetings were shut down by police claiming security risks. 2 main opposition leaders, Tundu Lissu and Luhaga Mpina, tried to register their candidacies. Both were blocked. One jailed on treason charges, the other rejected on technical grounds. The government said it was following the law. But the people saw something else: fear of competition. And then came the silence. Internet slowed. Reporters stopped calling. Even foreign media were denied entry into mainland Tanzania. When election day arrived, the ballot boxes filled quickly, too quickly. Samia won with 98% of the vote. The government declared victory. The streets declared war. What began as small, spread-out disagreements in Arusha and Songwe turned into countrywide protests. The same youth who once cheered her reforms now carried banners that read, "This is not democracy. This is self-crowning." Police opened fire. Forced time indoors started quickly everywhere. The peace Tanzania once bragged about was now measured by how many stayed silent. But silence would not last long, because buried beneath the fear, evidence was starting to surface. And it came from within her own house. In the early hours after the election, smoke rose over the coastal city of Tanga. Witnesses said it wasn't just debris burning, it was ballots. At 2:45 a.m., trucks rolled out of polling centers under military escort. Instead of heading to counting stations, they drove to old industrial lots on the outskirts of town. Locals heard the sound of shredders, saw flames in the distance. One worker managed to record a 19-second video before soldiers confiscated his phone. That clip, later leaked to the BBC, showed men in uniform tossing sealed ballot boxes into a pit of fire. The timestamp matched the night of the count. By morning, the government announced official results: landslide victory. But BBC analysts compared voter registry data with the results, and found impossible numbers. Some districts showed turnout above 120%. The revelations shook Tanzania's delicate peace. Crowds poured into the streets, waving burnt ballot remains and chanting, "We are not numbers, we are the nation." In Dodoma, soldiers patrolled the avenues. State TV went silent. The same morning, the African Union and SADC issued rare rebukes, calling the election deeply flawed and secretly planned. Tanzania's image, the beacon of stability, was falling apart. But the flames didn't just burn paper, they burned trust. And what came next was far darker. The silencing of anyone who dared to speak about what the world had just seen. The morning after the election, the streets of Dar es Salaam looked like a city under siege. Armored vehicles stood at every major intersection. Soldiers guarded the radio towers. What had been a political contest had now become a battle for control. Opposition offices were raided before dawn. Computers, documents, even water bottles were taken as evidence of conspiracy. Journalists were dragged from homes and studios. Independent newspapers printed their last editions before editors vanished. Tundu Lissu, already in detention, was moved to an undisclosed location. His lawyers weren't informed. Luhaga Mpina, disqualified before the vote, went into hiding. The government claimed both men had incited violence. No one could question the narrative. The internet was down again. Broadcasts were one-sided. Only the state channel spoke. Calm voices reading the same message over and over. Peace has returned. Do not be misled by foreign propaganda. But peace was nowhere to be seen. Across Zanzibar, secret, vehicles cruised through the night, stopping at homes of activists and students. Entire families disappeared. Neighbors whispered of black vans and midnight knocks. The government dismissed every report as rumor. Yet inside the ruling party, even loyal members began to feel the walls closing in. A CCM insider told BBC reporters, "The revolution she promised has turned into secret watching." Tanzania's democracy, once a model for Africa, was breaking down openly. And as the voices fell silent, one image cut through the blackout, a photo that no one was supposed to see. The photo came from a secret giver of information inside the Ministry of Interior. It showed 3 men in plain clothes escorting a person whose eyes were covered from an airport hangar. The file name read, Mpina Transfer Sure 4. For weeks, rumors swirled about opposition candidates being taken to secure facilities. But the image confirmed it. The disappearances were organized. International outrage spread fast. Amnesty International called for an investigation. The government called it fake image. Yet BBC analysts verified the timestamp and coordinates. Julius Nyerere International Airport, 3:12 a.m. It was certain. At the same time, families of detained activists received unsigned letters demanding silence in exchange for safe return. Many complied. Some refused. Those who spoke out were never heard from again. A Tanzanian journalist, speaking from exile in Nairobi, said, "They are not killing the opposition, they are erasing it." Meanwhile, SULUHU's speeches grew colder. She accused foreign hands of stirring chaos. Every question from reporters was avoided answering as an attack on national stability. In a chilling address, she said, "Discipline is not dictatorship. It is the medicine of a restless nation." The people watched, stunned. The reformer they once trusted now sounded like the very cruel rulers she had replaced. But while the government erased its enemies, a different storm was building. One from within the ruling party itself. The ruling party, CCM, the ruling party that once led Tanzania's freedom, had become a machine of power without purpose. Inside its marble halls, whispers of rebellion grew louder. Veteran members, those who had stood beside Nyerere, began questioning the new direction. They saw a leader only fixed on power, not progress. But in Samia's world, questioning meant disloyalty. One by one, critics were removed. Senior ministers were retired for national interest. Governors were replaced with newcomers loyal to her faction. Even the intelligence services were reshuffled, as SULUHU installed allies from her Zanzibar network. A secret BBC document revealed how CCM's internal meetings were now recorded, monitored, and written down for the president's office. Party democracy had died, replaced by secret watching and fear. In the markets, people whispered, "CCM is no longer a party, it's a crown." Economists warned that business confidence was collapsing. Foreign investors froze deals. The African Union issued its first-ever warning to Tanzania for breakdown of democracy. And in universities, where students once debated policy, only silence filled the halls. The youth watched the collapse of their country in real time, and they began to organize. The blackout had silenced journalists, the arrests had broken politicians, but there was one force the government could not control. A generation that had grown up online and was no longer afraid to go against the ruler. It started 3 nights before Election Day. One by one, Tanzania's phones, internet stopped working. WhatsApp stopped working. Twitter feeds froze. News websites returned error messages. For most of the country, the internet simply vanished. The government called it a technical disruption. But tech analysts quickly traced it to intentionally slowing the internet. A total internet shutdown ordered from the Ministry of Information. Journalists tried to bypass the blackout using satellite phones. Many were caught. A local reporter in Arusha described soldiers storming a newsroom, seizing cameras and routers before cutting power. By dawn, the silence was complete. It wasn't just about stopping rumors, it was about control. For the first time in Tanzanian history, an election took place in the dark, with no international monitors, no live coverage, no public counting. In Zanzibar, fishermen said they saw Coast Guard vessels blocking ferries, trapping the islands in separation. Opposition agents, unable to communicate, disappeared into the night. Foreign embassies tried to reach Dar es Salaam for updates. No calls went through. Tanzania had turned inward, sealed off from the world. One diplomat described it simply, "It felt like a curtain falling over an entire nation." But when that curtain finally lifted, when communication flickered back to life, what emerged from the darkness shocked even the most loyal supporters of the government. When the blackout ended 2 days later, the first videos began to spread. Grainy, shaky footage of chaos. Youths running through tear gas in Mwanza. Soldiers firing live rounds in Arusha. Women crying outside police trucks loaded with bodies. The protests had begun, the moment results were announced. Samia with 98% of the vote. People poured into the streets chanting, "We want truth," and "Our votes, our voices." But the government had prepared. Police lines stretched across bridges, armored carriers rolled into markets. A dusk-to-dawn curfew was announced, enforced by force. Foreign media, barred from entry, relied on fragments of video smuggled out through encrypted channels. Each clip told the same story. Unarmed protesters met with brutal crackdowns. The violence spread fast. From Dodoma to Morogoro, clashes erupted nightly. Hospitals overflowed with injuries. Funerals became protests, and protests became funerals. Amid the smoke and confusion, Samia appeared on national TV. Her face calm, her tone controlled. "Yes, some have died," she said, "but peace has a price." To many, it was the final confirmation. The reformer was gone. What stood before them was a ruler defending her throne. And as the nation grieved, it wasn't the soldiers or politicians who moved first. It was the mothers. The ones who had buried sons too young to die, too brave to be forgotten. The first march began in Dar es Salaam, 40 women in black veils walking silently toward the city center, each holding a photograph of a lost child. The police told them to go home. They didn't. More joined. By the time they reached Uhuru Square, there were hundreds. Some carried white cloths stained with blood. Others carried small coffins, empty but symbolic. Their message was simple: "We will not bury truth." Police hesitated. Orders crackled through radios, but even among officers there was doubt. One young constable was seen lowering his weapon, whispering, "I have a brother among them." The mothers kept walking. Their silence became a roar, not of violence, but of opposition. For the first time since the election, the people saw courage again, not fear. Images of the march broke through the digital walls. International media picked up the story. Hashtags flooded the internet. Mothers of Tanzania, we will not bury truth. The government tried to ignore it. State news called it a religious procession. But the world knew better. The mothers had done what politicians could not. They brought Tanzania's pain to the world stage. And the world was watching, especially one newsroom thousands of miles away, preparing a report that would tear through the silence and expose everything. Inside a quiet office in London, a team of BBC Africa journalists worked under tight security. For weeks, they had collected smuggled footage, satellite data, and witness statements from inside Tanzania. Each piece told fragments of the same grim puzzle: a government suppressing its people while masking it as peacekeeping. One file changed everything. Labeled TZ Operation Stability, it contained internal communications between high-ranking CCM officials and military commanders. The leaked memos discussed containment zones, non-lethal neutralization, and rapid disposal of evidence. Analysts confirmed the metadata, genuine. The BBC prepared a special investigative segment titled "From Reformer to Ruler: The Real Story of Samia Suluhu Hassan." Before it aired, they contacted Tanzanian authorities for comment. The response came fast. Publishing this report will be treated as foreign aggression. That warning only strengthened their resolve. On Friday at 9 p.m. GMT, the broadcast began. Viewers across Africa watched footage of soldiers firing into crowds, trucks removing bodies, and senior CCM figures approving restoration directives. It was the moment the government's secrecy cracked open. Tanzania's government called the footage fake, but the images were too clear, the timestamps too specific, the faces too familiar. The world had seen enough. And once truth escaped into daylight, even those closest to power began to panic. The cracks were no longer hidden inside ministries. They were spreading to the palace itself. A week after the BBC broadcast, new audio clips surfaced online. They were recordings of closed-door meetings between Samia and her security chiefs. In one, a voice matching the president's could be heard saying, "We will restore discipline at any cost. Let them call it what they want. I call it survival." In another, she reportedly scolded her ministers. "You are too soft. Do you think I came here to beg for democracy?" Her office denied everything, but insiders confirmed the voices, the location, even the date, a cabinet session in Dodoma 2 days after the protests began. The leaks spread faster than censorship could contain. Within 24 hours, Tanzanians were sharing them through VPNs and offline Bluetooth transfers. The government scrambled to track down the source. It turned out to be one of their own, a communications technician who had grown sick of what he called the betrayal of our people. He disappeared hours after the leak. By then, it was too late. The image of Mama Samia, the calm reformer, was gone. What remained was a woman, compared to the rulers she once criticized. And while the capital reeled from scandal, an unexpected front was opening. Not in Dodoma or Dar es Salaam, but in the very place she once called home, Zanzibar. Zanzibar, her birthplace, her pride, the archipelago that raised her, now stood against her. It began with a student strike at the University of Zanzibar, protesting the detention of classmates linked to opposition networks. Police arrived to disperse them, but the crowd only grew. Within hours, hundreds of young men and women marched through Stone Town carrying signs that read, "Zanzibar is not silent." The police fired warning shots into the air. The students didn't run. Ferries from the mainland were halted. Local radio stations went off air. Yet the island's opposition spread like wildfire. Fishermen, teachers, and taxi drivers joined the protests. For many, this wasn't just politics, it was betrayal. Zanzibar had once believed Samia would protect its autonomy and traditions. Instead, it now saw itself as her first casualty. By the week's end, the island was under partial lockdown. Still, crowds gathered every evening at the old port, chanting, "Mama, you have forgotten your children." From the balconies of her childhood home, one could hear the echoes of dissent rolling across the sea. Even the waters that once carried her rise to power now carried rebellion back toward her. And soon, that rebellion would no longer be confined to the islands. Africa itself was about to speak, and the truth, once whispered, would become a storm. The morning after the Zanzibar uprising, African media outlets broke their silence. Kenya's Citizen TV, Nigeria's Channels 24, and South Africa's SABC ran back-to-back coverage on Tanzania's trouble. Hashtags like Tanzania Blackout and Who Killed the Youth grew popular across the continent. The African Union, long silent, issued a vague statement calling for talk and calm actions. But it was a voice from Rwanda that started the talk. Former diplomat Dr. Kalisa Nduwimana, who declared on live television, "If Africa cannot hold its leaders accountable, then every capital will one day burn in silence." That line spread faster than any government statement. In Dar es Salaam, power flickered. Rumors claimed the government was preparing for military control. But abroad, Tanzanian students and exiles organized informal court hearings, sharing evidence of disappearances, forged votes, and military abuses. European Union officials demanded an investigation. The United States stopped a $140 million aid package. Within 48 hours, Tanzania's image, once of stability, broke violently across the global stage. For Samia Suluhu Hassan, being alone was closing in. Allies distanced themselves quietly. Even state media anchors began to hesitate before reading her name on air. And as the world's cameras turned toward her, a different kind of pressure began to rise. Not from foreign powers, but from inside her own government. Inside the heavily guarded State House, silence ruled the corridors. Ministers spoke in whispers, watching each other closely. Everyone knew the truth. The system was fracturing. The intelligence chief reportedly warned Samia that loyalty inside the military could no longer be certain. Several senior commanders had refused to follow new crackdown orders in Arusha and Mwanza. Some quietly withdrew troops, claiming equipment malfunctions. For the first time, she was alone in her war. In the same week, a convoy meant to carry her to a national address was abruptly rerouted. Protesters had blocked the main highway. Helicopters circled above. The national flag still flew, but it now felt like an old sign of something disappearing. Across Dar es Salaam, graffiti appeared overnight on walls and bridges. "You can erase our data, but not our dead." By dawn, the writing covered nearly every district. That morning, Samia cancelled all public appearances and retreated into private meetings. Her aides discussed a single deeply troubling question. Could she still hold the country without destroying it? But history rarely waits for permission. The people she had silenced were about to speak one last time, and this time the entire world would hear them. 3 days later, at 2:43 a.m., Tanzania's national television network suddenly went live. The screen flickered, then displayed an aerial view of Dar es Salaam's main square. Thousands of people filled the streets, holding candles. A group of young journalists had took over the TV channel. They streamed the vigil across YouTube, Telegram, and shortwave frequencies. The message was simple, raw, and powerful. "We are still here. You can't bury a generation." For 8 minutes, the feed stayed live before government technicians cut it. But by then, millions had watched. At dawn, silence swept through the capital. The military stayed in their barracks. No orders came. And as the sun rose over the harbor, word spread. President Samia Suluhu Hassan had left the city. Her plane, tracked on public radar, was heading toward Oman. Crowds didn't cheer. They stood in quiet disbelief, realizing the moment was both victory and tragedy, the end of fear, but also the loss of what might have been. The youth who had lit candles that night began to chant softly, "Tanzania, wake up." And this time, the whole nation did. The fall of the SULUHU government wasn't just about politics. It was a facing the truth, born from silence, data, and courage. Tanzania's youth turned darkness into refusal to obey, and refusal to obey into history. But what comes next for the nation still rebuilding from its own truth? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And if you want to see how Africa's next chapter unfolds, make sure to subscribe, stay alert, and never stop questioning power. Because in the end, every blackout ends with light.